it was very special. I felt honoured, but it was such a privilege to be able to go and see it in London, the lovely old theatre, the Colosseum Theatre in London. So the performers and so on, to all make that commitment to come to England for months and months, because I think the production has been extended twice, and it's now into August. And it's such a privilege to have a show from Japan with the Japanese cast, with the Japanese language, which is stunning, to come to England and allow us to sort of be there to see it. I think it was just wonderful, so thank you, Japan. A story which is perhaps very well known in Japan, but also very well known in the UK, I would think worldwide, and you bring that to a theatre from an anime, you've got to work out how to translate that from a screen into a real situation, a human situation, but not purely human, into a fantasy situation, because things fly and things disappear and then reappear from different places. And you have lots of odd creatures, different shapes and sizes, some that change shape. It's a massive undertaking. I can't imagine how long it took to try to sort of rewrite it for the stage, this whole idea of the production. But then you have to sort of work out how you're going to achieve all of those effects, the changing scene and scenery, from the human world to the fantasy world, to the spirit world, and then what happens there, all these curious beings that come out of the woodwork almost, and this other world within a world, which some of these people find themselves trapped in. And the only real free agent, the only one who's kind of moving around within it as a human, is the main character, Chihiro. And it's so beautifully done. Just as a cameo, you can look at any scene and think that there's beauty in this shot, but it's all transient because the scene's moving all the time. And sometimes when actors are, we kind of forget that they're actors, they're characters. When the character's coming on stage, the stage itself is changing. Some bits are disappearing up into the roof, other bits are falling away to the side. The whole thing is turning around. New bits are coming in, and suddenly what was a room becomes a bridge over some water. And when that moves, you're perhaps underground in the bathhouse where the boiler is, and so on. And this is constantly adjusting and changing. So the whole set is a massive puzzle. It is so amazing to watch. From my point of view, I need to see it another 3 or 4 times because there is so much I want to take in. I'm so pleased it was in Japanese. We have seen, I only saw the last half of it a few days before we went over, or before we saw the show. But even so, I would have grasped pretty much the essence of what was going on, but I wouldn't have understood each scene as it happened. I would have understood pretty much what was happening by the attitudes of the characters. But there were also subtitles, which was so cleverly done, above the stage and to the sides of the stage, so that people could read the English version or in translation of what was going on. That was a really good idea, but it did break the concentration a little bit, because if there's a bit of dialogue going on and not so much activity for a few moments, you want to see what's being said. So you flick your eyes up and suddenly the scene changes, so you flick your eyes back down, and so you're constantly adjusting for two bits of information coming towards you, the visual and the actual translation itself. But it wasn't a problem. But it makes me want to go back and see it again, so I can concentrate more on what's happening on stage, and perhaps understand the story better beforehand. So I've already got that information. Then I can read it visually, not have to rely on the subtitles. But the Japanese approach to theatre, I haven't seen enough of it to be able to really answer that. But I think this was just the most stunning production and performance. And everybody in it is It's just giving all of their energy, such concentrated energy, even if you can't see the human behind a piece of scenery that's moving sideways, or if it's a lift door opening like that, the next bit comes down, shuts again, it closes. By the time it opens, there's a different scene behind it. Masses of people making all this stuff work. But you forget that they're there. You look at the beautifully designed lift doors, which open, and then there's another opening behind that, and another opening behind that, and you feel yourself falling into this sort of tunnel of lift doors, not knowing where you're going to end up. And then the characters step out again into a completely new environment, because while that's happening, the whole scene around it is changing. I can pick out various characters that I was just quite absorbed by, but I don't know if it's fair, because everybody is so good. Yeah. And you only need one element that doesn't get it right, and you can kind of lose a scene for a few seconds. But the amount of trust that everybody has in everybody else, I'm thinking, a performance like that must be immense. You've got to know that when you turn around with your bit of scenery or as a character, that person is there holding what they need to hold, or in the position they need to be in. And when I talk about athleticism, these are trained athletes in a similar way, but even more so, the ballet dancers are. Because ballet dancers have to pick people up and hold them above their head and make it look effortless, as though that person's floating. But you can only do that if you've got fantastic muscle control. So certainly 3 times that I saw the human partner is helping the dragon to sort of gain height, and to do that he leaves the ground, he just jumps, but so fluidly, you don't see the jump, you just see he's left the ground, and then he twists around and lands in a completely different position. So he's doing acrobatics, which a normal human being wouldn't be able to do at all. I mean, you can turn around on the spot, you can jump up in the air and turn around, but dancing, running forward, jumping and spinning while you're controlling this dragon in time with music, in time with the scene and what's happening elsewhere on the stage, and then landing perfectly, which a lot of athletes can't do if they're doing box jumps and that sort of thing on the Olympics. You see that often they stumble when they land and they lose points for that. But these athletes just know that spot, that's where I'm landing, and that's my next move. So they're always thinking ahead. Where do I go from there? When I hit the ground, I've got to be over there. And it's sensational. And that is stunning in its own right, but because all of that sort of thing is so absorbing, each of those techniques, each of those little stories in their own right, the dragon, No Face, and all the little animals, and the scenery changes, the lift and so on, all of those have got to be choreographed in their own right. And then everything else has to fit around them. Everything has to dovetail like that, so that you don't see the gaps. And the humans don't matter. It's the set which is alive, and the animals which are alive, and the spirits which are alive. The humans are just there to assist them, and so they don't get in the way at all. But there's some beautiful scenes, and some striking scenes, and some scary scenes. There's something about the way No Face was brought to the stage, which is really very, very smart, very clever, because he never seems to rush. He never seems to walk, just floats. It's, again, a human partner assisting No Face. But one of the amazing sort of abilities that that actor had, and there might, I can imagine there's a technique to the way they were doing it, but and I can't sort of do it here, but when it's moving away, but wants to pay attention to something, the body's moving away, but the head is turning like that, but you don't see it, it's just, and almost turns 180 degrees the wrong way. Of course, it might have been moving the mask, you never know, but that's not how it came over. And to have that technique, that poise, to be so steady when you're moving, without rushing, without walking, without tripping, and to still be able to turn in a very spiritual way, but a very unhuman way. Humans don't move like that. That was quite stunning as well. But that's quite contrast to all the massive activity of people just spending half the time airborne, flying through the air. Because No Face is a single character and in a sense quite lonely, quite separate. He's in a he's caught in his own sort of dream world. And that's quite poignant, that is quite emotional in lots of ways, even though you sort of fear him with one part of your body, him or it, with one part of your body. Another is feeling, well, a lot of these other characters are either very loud and annoying, you think, you need to be taught a lesson sort of thing. But No Face is very sort of distant from everything. And so you feel a sense of sympathy, but also fear. And that's very interesting. And it's a very slow, calm, moving character. That's also quite scary. Well, it's sort of reminiscent perhaps of a ghost, but it's not a ghost in the sort of childhood scary fairy story kind of a way. You know, being sort of floaty and look at me, I'm a ghost, you know, wearing a white sheet, sort of thing. I felt this was like a sort of captive character, almost under a spell itself, that it couldn't break. And you don't really know the story until later on, when Chihiro befriends someone or something who's quite scary. And then there becomes a kind of a slow emotional connection between the two. And Chihiro is the healer a lot in this, as with, is it Haku? Haku. The boy turning into the dragon, or being turned into the dragon. The dragon having this sort of poisonous thing inside it because of Yubaba, or one of the sisters, the twin sisters of Yubaba. And even though she puts her trust in the boy when she first gets there, then he sort of disappears and the dragon appears. And the dragon is under this spell as well, so everything has got the potential to be good or bad at times. But she wants to help the dragon because she doesn't feel he's bad. And she wants to help No Face because she feels that there's some good that can happen there. And she's very straight with everybody, even with Yubaba. And the boy has told her, reinforced it time and time again, don't argue, just say you want to work, you want to work, you want to work. If you change that, you'll be under the spell. This is your protection. So she befriends people who don't want her don't want her friendship. Like in the bathhouse, what's the character called? The spidery. Akamaji. He doesn't want her there at all, but she befriends him. So all the way through, she's making these connections and learning how to navigate through this world. And in a sense, that's a metaphor for life outside of this spirit world. So there are a lot of layers of understanding in this, which you can find at different times, depending how you feel. You can see it as an adventure, how humans consume everything around them, like her parents turn out to be very greedy in this fantasy. And because of that, it turns them into ugly sorts of people who then are in danger themselves because they just see what they want initially. And she, at the outset, is saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. We need to go back to the real world, to real values. But everything kind of slips away and she is caught in this dream. So there are lots of elements, and of course there's a moral element running through it as well. She works hard and she does jobs she doesn't like, but even with the bathhouse, when the guest arrives, covered in yuck and stuff, even that she does. She rolls her sleeves up and says, job that's got to be done, I'll get on with it, because this is what I've been told I've got to do to protect myself. So I think it's a kind of preparation for life in lots of ways. whatever life throws at you, whatever you can't understand, always do your best and help those that you can. And eventually it will come back to you. I think it's a very clever ability that the writer and the studio and the production has. They've managed to incorporate a story which can be seen as a childhood story. Excuse me. It can be seen as a moralistic story or a fantasy, but it's a human story as well. And the production that we went to, it was, I think, pretty much 90%, maybe more, adults. But they were holding matinees as well, so children could go middle of the day, perhaps at weekends or so on, which is the way a lot of West End theatres run. So saying that, I think it's the sort of show production that appeals to people regardless of age. So I think you could have children of anything from 8 to 80. If, like me, you don't mind what age you are when you go to see something, you go to see that because you're interested, then I wouldn't mind going to a sort of children's pantomime because I'd be fascinated to see how it works. I used to go when I was a kid. So the fact that I'm not an 8-year-old any longer wouldn't stop me from going. And equally something like this is, I feel, more designed for humans to go and experience, whatever age you are. So I think it will have an appeal for kids, and they might understand it on a certain level. It will have an understanding for adults, even senior adults or whatever, because they will look at the production and the performance and the storyline and think this is a fantastic idea, because it's telling a story in a fantastical kind of sense, but it translates as something that you can really understand. So I don't see any barrier there. I think it's for kids and adults and everyone in between. What I will certainly say is that sorry about this, Studio Ghibli, but no, this is a compliment. But I preferred the stage production because there is that sense of, we were talking about
really?
that sense of danger, because this is for real. Every night is the first night, because things can go wrong. Technically, cast member can be sick, somebody can trip over, the orchestra can play a rotten note, but they didn't. But when it's live, there's an extra kind of electricity that the whole thing rides on, that we're doing this tonight, especially for you. With the animated, if you see something and you miss something, you can wind it back, and here on stage, you can't easily do that.
Yeah.
But there's so much more colour and vitality on the stage, and you kind of get a sense, even if you don't really think about it, of how long these athletes have trained physically, just to be able to dance and move around in formation or as independent artists, plus acting the part, plus in their costumes or change of costumes or change in the scenery. You're much more aware of the immensity of this rather than seeing a digital animate. Everybody, well, I say everybody, there were 8 of us, family. My God, that was fantastic. And Poppy, who might not have been able to join us, one of my daughters, sent a message after saying, I'm so pleased I was able to join with everybody for the weekend, and I loved every minute of Spirited Away. Toby is a musician as well, so he was absolutely stunned by the musical as part of the performance as well. So he was listening with a strong ear to that and also watching. I'd love to see it in Japan. If it's playing. So if this production were put on by English, and if it were in English, I think it would change quite dramatically. I think the feeling, the atmosphere would change quite a lot. The part of the reason for me this was so good was that it retained its Japanese sense, and that gave it integrity. Like I'm reading at the moment Tokyo Express, and I know that the translation is probably as close as they could get it, but I know it doesn't have quite the same meaning. as the Japanese version, and I think that's what would happen on stage as well. This is something completely new, so you're being very brave in a way because you're committing yourself to a massive production, and you've got to hope people are going to like it. But I think it also comes at a time when Japan is becoming such a, for a lot of people, it's a go-to place. They want to know more about Japan. And I think over the past 5 years, you've had Olympics, you've had massive football stuff and sports things going on there. So in the sporting sense, in the cultural sense, and I think in some ways there's a crying out, certainly in the UK, I can't speak for everyone in the UK, for kind of older values, rather than the sort of greed, I want everything now, I want the new phone, I want the new car, I want everything. And everything old is rubbish, just knock it down and put something new up because it's more convenient. I'll just flash my card everywhere I go and everything's done for me. And I think putting the brakes on that and taking you back to a place where human activity is what's important, what happens in your life and so on, is really important. So I think that story gets through to people, but Japan is on the map in people's minds. And I think that is growing and growing and growing and growing. I think one of our conversations a while ago, that people look to somewhere like Japan, or Japan in particular, because it has this stability about it. At least that's the perception from the outside. And part of that perception is its history and its rituals. They're steeped in thousands of years. They've been established for many, many thousands of years. And I think that is attractive to a lot of people when there's so much change so quickly elsewhere. Japan still has this aura of something mystical, something which is particular to Japan. It's not the same as any of the countries around it, Korea, China, Taiwan, or whatever. It is by itself a particular culture of people, beautiful and beautiful historic interest. It stands there, and it feels to me there's no reason for that to change. I'll just be aware of how many people swamp the country, but as part of that's good for Japan. Now, with that in mind, if you bring a major production from that country, from Japan, to the West, then people can say, I've heard about this, it's been on television, or, oh look, there's a big Japanese production, we must go, because it gives you an insight into the artistic, creative world that comes from Japan. And I think that's a connection through that to the country itself, to the Japanese people. So again, its origination is in Japan, its creation is in Japan, it's full of Japanese artists with Japanese language, and it's come to a theatre near you in London. And I think that gives people a bit of a sort of open door to step into and say, right, for the next 3 hours, 4 hours, I'm in Japan, in this mystical world. And that will give you an insight into the animes as well, that you might then decide, I want to see more of what's happening on Japanese animes and historic stories. Thank you, Japan. Thank you, Spirited Away cast and everybody. That's fantastic. Arigato.
Bye-bye.